In the last lesson, we saw how to create a client account using the API. As you can see, the client account we created using the API doesn't have a site or any permissions yet, unlike the one we created manually. As we learned, granting a client account access to a site and assigning permissions requires a separate API call. Let's do a quick refresher on how site access is granted and permissions are set for a client account through the interface. After a client account is created, we are directed to this view where we can assign a site to the account and then run through a list of permissions to enable as needed. In this lesson, these are the steps we will learn to automate using the API. Let's hop on over to Duda's developer docs to take a look at the API call needed to assign a site and set permissions for a client account. We'll start by looking at the client permissions object, which is a list of permissions that we'll need to include in the body of our API request. To get a better idea of what each permission does, let's scroll down and take a closer look. You'll notice a description for each permission along with any dependency permissions that may be required. For example, if we wanted to allow a client to have full editing access to the site, including the ability to add or delete elements, we would need to send over the value edit in our request. However, the edit permission has prerequisites, meaning that to enable it, we must also add the blog and limited editing permissions. Let's see what adding a permission with dependencies looks like in the UI. Just to keep things simple, let's add the permission we just covered in the developer docs. Notice what happens when I enable the full editing capabilities permission. Both content editing and blog permissions are automatically selected as well. So if we were to make a call to the API and include a permission that has dependencies, the system will automatically add those dependencies for us. In other words, you don't need to include a permission's dependencies in the body request. The system will take care of that for you. Now let's take a look at the API call that allows us to assign a site and set permissions for a client account. This is a POST request that requires both path parameters and a request body to be sent. As part of the endpoint, we need to include both the account name and the site alias. And in the request body, we need to include a list of permissions. To help us create a test payload, click Add String for each permission we want to send in the request body. Let's pull up the Client Permissions object for reference. To give the client full editing capabilities, I'll need to include Edit in my list. As we just saw, this permission has dependencies, but we do not need to include those in our request as the system will automatically add those for us. Let's add a couple more permissions to our list. When you are ready, copy the payload and head back to Postman. Once back in Postman, let's add a new request to the collection and rename it. Let's set the request method to post and paste in the endpoint. For the account name, I'm going to revisit our previous response to copy the correct value. Then let's do the same for site name. Next, let's add in our payload. Before we send over our request, let's go back to our client list to see what we currently have. We have our client that was created using the API with no sites assigned or permissions set. Once we've run this call, the client will have both a site and permissions. When you are ready, click Send. We should see a 204 status code, which signifies that the call ran successfully. And if we visit our client list again and refresh the page, we should see both a site assigned to the client and all the permissions we sent over, including the dependencies which were automatically added. And that's it. Our client now has a site assigned and the right permissions set. The next step is getting them into their account. In the next lesson, we'll go over how to send them a link so they can access their account and site.